Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options and Play video update. So it's Friday. You know what that means? Earnings on the radar. Uh, we are through the heart of earnings season. We're on like our slope, on like the downward slope, but we're also getting into the retail portion of earnings, and um, we got the holiday season coming up, and that's typically, I mean, it's like the holiday guide and then like the actual quarter when they report in January, February. Those are like seasonally like the two strongest or the two most volatile stretches for retail. So, got a bunch of big retail names looking coming up to look forward to. So, um, yeah, should still be plenty of action. All right. So Monday, before the open, nothing of interest. At least nothing that interests me. That's on my radar. After the close, only one name, and even then, kind of like a smaller one, ZTO. So a China logistics company. Priced in about 2 points. Those are monthly options, and I guess really the only reason it even interests me is because you can see on the chart where it's like bumping up into, right. So if it gets through 2250, 23 area with some volume, could really kind of take off, pent up breakout, but not a name I trade very often. If I mean I can't remember the last time I even really pulled this up. Definitely more speculative, but interesting. You know, if it's a name you follow, maybe it's worth taking a shot because it's an interesting bullish setup right here as it kind of flags underneath this long-term area of resistance or the long-term top. All right. Tuesday, much bigger day. So first things first, Home Depot. So they're pricing in about 8.5 points for this coming week. Definitely one of like the biggest names of the week. Also one of the biggest names in retail. Um, it had been historically a pretty weak performer around earnings until its report last quarter, and it went on like a crazy run. It popped and then took off and kept running, and it's basically just been pushing and pushing and pushing since. So stock is in a really tight flag right around its 52-week high. Action's been great, the numbers have been great, but expectations really high, similar to Walmart, right? Um, and I'd say this, like, I think Lowe's is just a much better setup. I mean, I'll get to it in a couple minutes when I talk about it because they're scheduled to report next week too. So, you know, with both names in like the same week, if I had to choose between one or the other, I think I'd go with Lowe's just because the setup looks a lot more interesting to me, and it has historically been like a bigger mover, at least a more consistent mover too than Home Depot. Kohl's, another. Another retail name here. It's going to be a pretty heavy retail week. So 525 is what's priced in for Kohl's. Typically a pretty consistent mover. And what's interesting about this quarter is that it's actually going to report before Macy's, so it has that element of surprise. So you can see here, so like this big drop, that was actually on Macy's earnings. So it had a pretty huge move in reaction in response to Macy's results, and then when it actually reported itself, wasn't that big of a move. So this time it's flipped. So Kohl's would go first. And, you know, like the options, I guess they do seem a little high versus its recent moves. So it has been consistent. It has a really obvious gap above, but at the same time, the options like don't really leave a lot of room. So I do like the idea of a volatility strategy, but I would also have to get risk down because those options seem a little bit more expensive to me. TJX, 375 is what's priced in, but those are monthly options. It's just consistently solid numbers, but consistently like lackluster moves, lackluster reactions, and that's really just the story of TJX. It really it's a tough name to capitalize on earnings. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. What I'm looking at personally is that you have this report and raw stores. So you have two off-price names reporting next week, and Burlington doesn't report next week. So that to me creates an opportunity for a sympathy trade on Burlington. All right. So you know I'm always on the lookout for sympathy trade ideas, and Burlington to me definitely seems like it could fit that bill for next week. Medtronic, nice looking bull flag, coming off like a couple nice quarters in a row, right? It's priced in 375 this time around. Big med tech name. type bull flag. I'm bullish biased here, and it seems like if the numbers are good, could be like maybe another move into like the mid-teens on this. So something bullish. I mean, I'd be bullish biased. I mean, I wouldn't be expecting a huge move, but a few points into like the mid-teens on this thing if the numbers are good. Especially, I mean, medtech names are right now seem to be acting pretty great. So chart looks great, sector's acting great, numbers have been great. So you get the story with that one. After the close Tuesday, really only one that I'm kind of looking at is Urban. They're pricing in 3 points this quarter, and the volatility has really been drying up on this around earnings. But you can see from the chart that it's actually starting to break. So it's starting to break like this really significant downtrend, right? You can see like very clearly just breaking like this long like year and a half downtrend, and it's still pretty heavily shorted. So it hasn't had really a big move in a while, but it's also showing a lot more life than it has in a while. So I'm on the fence because it's kind of tough to lay out the money because like it hasn't had the moves to reward options, but at the same time, it's a little bit more interesting this quarter than it has been in a while. So, I'm on the fence. I guess maybe like wait and see, but if I do see maybe some like unusual option activity, or maybe I see some of the retail names really start to swing around, then maybe I'll take a shot on this. Wednesday before the open, so lows. So here's what I was talking about. So you saw the chart of Home Depot before, and now look at the chart of Lowe's. I mean, how interesting does this look as it kind of just like hangs out right underneath this resistance range, right? So the price in 8 points. I definitely feel like this is one of the most interesting setups of the week. Basing right under that yearly resistance around 116, 117, coming off a strong quarter. It's had some huge moves on earnings the past year. Options are high, but at the same time, it has had a couple moves in excess of 10 points. So, I do think it could be set up for another big move, but I probably would still want to get the risk down with like maybe like spreads or even like flies or something along that line. Target, another big name. 7.5 is what's priced in on Target. Last quarter, just an epically large move. Huge pop. And it's acted great since. Expectations are definitely high. Like a lot of these names that had a big move last quarter and have kept running. Expectations are definitely high. But I do feel like more so than like Walmart or Home Depot that this could still have more upside. It's kind of based off valuation, and options are pricey. But if you can get some sort of lower debit bullish strategy, I think it's kind of like an interesting way to go about this. PDD, China tech name, like explosive setup. Priced in 6.5, but those are monthly options. It had a big beat here and then like a huge run, paused, and then had like another massive surge just recently. So it has a ton of momentum, but in terms of like an actual earnings setup, I don't think it's great because it's up so sharply in such a short period. I think my plan is to like sit out the report, see what they say, and then maybe like jump in and revisit for like a really like quick swing. Because this thing just has like a ton of momentum, and like names like this, I feel like they can go a lot further than you expect. So I'm definitely watching it, but like in terms of an earnings trade, I don't really see anything that really interests me much. After the close Wednesday, L Brands, 210, 220 in that ballpark is what's expected. Definitely one of the worst performers in retail. It's in a pretty tight consolidation, right around 52-week low. It does look ready for a move, and I feel like it might not have a ton of downside from here, um, and the upside could be more. So the risk reward seems to favor the upside, but the numbers have been pretty lousy, and the upside could take longer to develop. So in terms of like an earnings trade, maybe something like a staggered strangle, or maybe like a longer term, like 3, 4, 5 months, like call spreads, or some sort of bullish strategy. Maybe looking if the numbers aren't terrible, maybe it starts to turn the corner and rebound. So some sort of like longer term approach to like a near-term catalyst, I guess is how I would view L Brands. Jack in the Box. So restaurant name, 7.5 is what's priced in. Those are monthly options though. It's certainly not my favorite restaurant stock to trade, and honestly, restaurant stocks really haven't been that great this quarter either. So not my favorite restaurant stock, and I don't really like the restaurant stocks at the moment either. So uh, you can see where I'm going with this. Had a pretty big move last quarter, but it's really not a consistent mover. So I think I'm just going to leave it alone. NetEase, 21.5 points, what's priced in. I will say it does seem like it could explode on numbers. You can see like it's kind of hanging above like a pretty key resistance range, right? And it's got room higher. But China tech names still, they're not really running hard. Like, I mean, some of the numbers have been good, but the action hasn't been great. So this is definitely more speculative. But if it can really get through 300 with good participation, good volume, like your next target's probably up around 330. So it's priced in at 21.5, but it does seem as though like there's like visibility for like a 40-point move almost on the chart here. Sonos. Actually, one of the more interesting setups next week. So 225 is what's priced in. Those are monthly options. It's trying to turn the corner after just really poor stretch after its IPO. So big breakout in August on good participation and it's hung on to the gains pretty well. And it seems like it's a make or break quarter, right? Because finally broke the downtrend, showing some life. And now it's like if they can beat and really start to get things going, I mean, it could really start to make like a move back into like the 20s versus if they disappoint, flops, maybe it gets back down into like that 11, 10 range. So options, it seems the options seem reasonable based off like the setup. So thinking of volatility strategy on this. Thursday before the open, Anaplans. We get some software names coming up now. So these are monthly options. They're priced in at 9.5. Software starting to look a little bit better. Some rays of sunlight there. But there still really hasn't been many names that have been rewarded on earnings. So technically they're starting to look a little bit better, but earnings-wise, still not great, right? So I haven't had much success with this stock since it became public, and the options are expensive because they're monthly, so I'm probably going to leave this alone. I'll talk about a couple other names in the software space for Thursday after the close that look more interesting to me. Bazoon, another China tech name, 675 is what's priced in. Those are monthly options. Kind of a tight like pennant forming. You can see, right? Tight pennant forming. Has a history of big moves on earnings. I feel like it's definitely an interesting setup. And it seems like it could have 5+ points either direction, right? The only problem is that its options are priced for 675. So, like I feel like the chart says 5 to 6, but the options are priced at 675. So, like the only way I feel like I could really get involved with this is if I could get the risk down enough to be able to capitalize on a potentially smaller move. So, I mean, like that's like the issue with Bazoon. But I do think the setup is actually pretty interesting overall. Macy's. So like I said, Kohl's is going to go first. Macy's is priced in at 2 points, but if it has a huge reaction to the Kohl's numbers, then I don't know what's going to be left for it to move on its own results. And you can see, obviously, last quarter stunk, and the stock got slammed, and it really hasn't bounced. So, I mean, it definitely is lagging a lot of its peers, but it's going to be like, well, if I do anything with Macy's, it'll probably be determined by if it has like a big move in response to the Kohl's numbers. Kind of along the same lines there too, Nordstrom. So this is Thursday after the close. Nordstrom priced it in 5 points. It's like technically it's more similar to Kohl's where it's at in the chart, and it does tend to react to Kohl's and the Macy's numbers too. So, I mean, I feel like Nordstrom, to me, it would probably only be a trade if it doesn't really do a whole lot prior to its own numbers. So if it's up a lot or if it's down a lot, I'll probably just leave it alone. But if it's kind of like chopping around in the area where it's at right now, going into its own numbers, then maybe I'd take a shot on it. Williams Sonoma. So this one's an interesting one. So 7.25 or so is what's priced in, but those are monthly options. Really tight technical consolidation. You can see just underneath like the high from last year. It's a pretty heavily shorted name actually, and it has kind of like a nice combination of a few signals I look for that say it could be a pretty big mover. So technical consolidation, history of big moves, heavily shorted, and I really wish they had weekly contracts because I don't necessarily want to pay for all that extra time. But even like paying for like the monthlies, I mean, it does seem like there could still be some room left on those contracts. So, I mean, I'd like to get the risk down a little bit, but definitely one of the more interesting names to me for next week. Raw stores. Priced in 8 points. Those are monthly options. So like I said with TJX, these two both off price. Burlington doesn't report next week, so I think I'm going to focus on those Burlington options for a sympathy trade. Intuit. So a couple of software names now. So 12 and a quarter is what's priced in on Intuit. It had a really nice quarter back in August, and it actually traded up to its 52-week high, and then like all the software names collapsed, and this got dragged back down. So it didn't get hit as hard as some other names, but it's still well off its 52-week high. Last quarter was solid, and I think I'd be bullish biased, but if I do anything, I'm thinking probably be like smaller, definitely more speculative, as again like the action in the group still isn't great when it comes to earnings. I mean, like technically it seems like they're starting to turn the corner, but in terms of getting rewarded on earnings, you're still not at that point yet. Splunk, another software name. So 9.5 is what's priced in Splunk, and the option pricing at 9.5 actually doesn't seem that bad. It's had some bigger moves on earnings, and it's kind of like a battleground name. Technically, under some key levels underneath that 200-day, and some of these stocks, some of like these growth momentum stocks that are under the 200-day, have had like larger moves when they've reported under that moving average. And this one in particular has had some big swings already this year. So I've traded this a lot in the past, and I'm thinking I'm probably going to take a shot on it again. And I think maybe some like out of the money strangles might be the way to go. Looking for like a 10 plus point move either way. Pure Storage, 2.5 is what's priced in. Those are monthly options though. It's a storage play, obviously. Climbed off its low nicely, finally closed the gap from May. Memory names kind of mixed this quarter, like Western Digital, Micron, Seagate, right? So I'm not really sure what to expect, and it's definitely not a consistent mover, although it has had some big moves recently, but overall not a consistent mover. I may look at something on the bull side, maybe, just to see if maybe it can kind of like claw back some ground, like versus like Micron, Western Digital, and Seagate, which are more or less like closer to their 52-week highs, whereas this thing is still well off its 52-week high. So if anything, maybe something smaller, bullish, out of the money, looking for maybe like a move back into like the low to mid 20s again. All right, and then last but not least, Friday before the open, Foot Locker, 5 points, what's priced in, and good or bad, this stock is the definition of consistency on earnings. I mean, like clockwork, this thing has big gaps, big moves, and I just don't see why it can't continue. I mean, like over and over and over and over again, quarter after quarter after quarter for the last like 2 to 3 years, this has had huge moves, huge gaps. Coming into the holiday quarter, I just go with history on it. I mean, like the history is said time and time and time again. It's had big moves and big gaps. So, strangle, straddle, some sort of volatility strategy. All right, that's it. So you can see a ton of retail names coming up, sprinkled in with some tech, some software, and it's kind of like a good recipe. I mean, you got some names that look interesting. You got some potentially big movers. So even though we're through earnings season, still plenty to look forward to. All right. So if you like these videos and you're looking for more trade ideas, then please follow up with the link in the description for more information on options and play. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you all on Monday.